Hello, and welcome to my Women Pharmacist Writers Series Part 2 of 4. This is Kim Newlove. I am the host of the Pharmacist Voice podcast, where I share my journey from pharmacist to voice actor and interview a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain so that you can be inspired to use your voice too. This is episode 127, and you can find the show notes with links to anything mentioned today on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. You can also find my medical narration demo and a link to my online course, Pronounce Drug Names Like a Pro, on my website. That website again is thepharmacistvoice.com. If you're a pharmacist who's interested in becoming a medical writer, you are going to love this series. Part 1 of this series featured Dr. Janan Sarwar. There's a link to it in the show notes, or you can find it on your favorite podcast player. It's episode 125 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Today is part 2 of this series. My guest is Dr. Brittany Hoffmann-Eubanks. Brittany earned both a PharmD and an MBA, and she is the founder and CEO of Banner Medical LLC, a medical communications company. Her work at Banner Medical integrates her passion for writing with her medical background as a pharmacist. Brittany is an expert content developer for both healthcare providers and consumers. She has created 2 online courses. They are Medical Writing Mastery and Medical Writing Jumpstart. Both courses help pharmacists start their medical writing careers. She is a strong advocate for the profession of pharmacy and uses her medical writing voice to amplify issues that are important to her. This is a longer interview, and just a heads up, we cover a lot of information. I'm going to give you a broad sense of the topics. We talk about her newborn son, medical writing, her team of medical writers, her online courses, mindset issues such as imposter syndrome, entrepreneurship, coaching, negotiating rates, and her upcoming book about her IVF journey. This is a great interview, and I think you're really going to like it. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Brittany Hoffmann-Eubanks. Hi, Brittany. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm so great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm happy to get you while you're on maternity leave and you have a little bit of free time. You are a busy woman.
Yes, these days I am. My son keeps me very busy on his schedule for sure.
Of course. Well, congratulations on the birth of your son. And how do you love motherhood?
Oh my goodness. It's one of those things that you just really can't ever prepare for. He's literally the love of my life. And it has been such a journey to have him having to go through the IVF process. And it took about 5 years or so in total for my husband and I to be able to have him. So it's just every day I stare at this little tiny human and I'm like, did you really come out of me? Like, how did this happen? And just been enjoying the moments with him, seeing him hit those little milestones as we go, each day and each week, and going, man, it feels like just yesterday, but he's 6 weeks old already. Like, where did the time go? So it's been a lot of fun.
Yes. Oh, and the good times will keep rolling. Let me tell you, I have 2 and they're a little bit older, but I remember when going from a size 1 diaper to a size 2 diaper was cause to celebrate.
Yeah, I know. I think we're in that like transition stage between newborn to like size 1, and the size 1s just look incredibly huge compared to like the newborn size. So it's definitely interesting. And the sleep deprivation, that's fun too.
Oh, and just let me tell you, once you have a second one, I don't know if you're going to have a second one, but sometimes they don't sleep or nap at the same time.
Yeah.
And oh my golly gosh, that was a curveball. But you just enjoy that one while you have him little and all to yourself. And just enjoy the blessing that he is.
Yeah, thank you. The snuggles are the best part. I think it's just amazing to have that, need. I didn't ever really realize how much I could love someone until I had him. I mean, obviously I love my husband more than anything, but it's just a totally different level with your kids. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yes. And something that's important that my Aunt Janet told me is that love isn't divided. So when your son was born, you didn't have to divide your love between your husband and your baby. Love
Yeah.
multiplies. It's magic.
Yeah. It's like a perfect way of explaining it. It's just this perfect little human being. And then on top of it, there's like ways of like, oh my gosh, I'm responsible for this human being now. And so there's, that bit of fear in there too of like, oh, I just want him to be happy and healthy and be, a good person in this world. So there's, now there's other fears that go along with that of like being responsible for shaping, this human being that's going to interact in the world. But I'm excited for the challenge. It's a new experience, and we're just trying to take in each moment, as they come.
Well, you're doing a great job already. You're having those thoughts that every parent has. Please know that they are normal and everything's going to be fine.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, that is such a pleasant opener. I hate to drag you into business, but I brought you on the show today to talk about how you use your voice as a woman pharmacist writer. I understand that you not only write, but you educate other pharmacist writers, both men and women, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear all about that. You have the floor, ma'am.
Well, thank you. I know it probably seems a bit odd to talk about, a writing voice, particularly being in the medical writing field, because we focus a lot on just being fair and balanced and making sure that we're not interjecting our own biases into, what we're working on. Especially if it's something scientific related, journal articles, papers, et cetera. But I think it's actually a big misunderstanding that you can't have your own style, voice, or tone to the writing. Obviously, we can't interject our own opinions in most cases unless it's something that is meant to do that. But you absolutely can have your own voice and your style to the writing that you do, and that's something that I try to teach my pharmacist writers that work with me with my company, Banner Medical, but also in the courses that I've developed to help pharmacists who want to get into medical writing. So I often joke that there's a very large pharmacology book that I just absolutely despised in pharmacy school. I used it as a doorstep because it just read like stereo instructions and I could not get through it. And so I think that's something that I focus on now, is just trying to make sure that the type of medical writing that we do is engaging. It has a purpose. So, depending on who our audience is, what's the end picture? How do we make sure that people know what it is that they need to know at the end of that particular piece or that project, right? So, for example, if the end goal is just surface level knowledge, have we accomplished that? Or do we need a healthcare provider, if we're doing, let's say, continuing medical education, to take an action so that they can better take care of their patients, or a patient could have a better outcome? All of those things come into play with crafting and developing those pieces. And it's fun to have that kind of challenge of figuring out, how do we make something enjoyable to read and that's engaging and that people want to come back to? Because, we're all pharmacists and we have busy professional lives in addition to whatever it is that we do in our personal lives. So no one really wants to sit down and read endless pages of something, that, they could do on their own. They really want something that's crafted and tailored to them. And I joke with my writers, anyone can regurgitate a package insert, right? Or some trial data. But, we haven't really done our job until we've turned it and changed it into something that's tailored and that is understandable and that people want to read. So it's fun trying to figure out how we can use our voice in different ways to accomplish the same thing at the end.
Well, you've kind of teased up the idea of medical writing as something that can be boring. But in your opinion, what is medical writing, anyways? And how are the many ways that you use your voice to do medical writing?
So medical writing is really just an overarching term for anything that is writing about medicine. So there are so many different fields and opportunities in medical writing. You could be in industry and maybe are doing clinical reports, doing regulatory type writing, can do continuing medical education where you're helping to craft pieces for healthcare providers to get their continuing education credits so that they can stay up to date and take care of their patients to the best of their ability. There's also consumer facing projects. So if we're doing patient education or blog writing or health information, there's just so many different opportunities, out there in medical writing. So it's actually, believe it or not, a $3 billion industry, which when I first heard that figure kind of blew me away. I was like, okay, that makes sense. But what's awesome about that is there's so many different niches within medical writing that if you're someone who's interested in doing medical writing, you have so many different opportunities to carve out your own space and to make it yours. So when we talk about, having your own voice, it really is one of those unique areas where you can, tap into that and take your own interest areas or zone of genius or superpower, whatever you want to call it, and make it your own. And so for us, we tend to focus in 3 different areas, primarily the continuing medical education space. We are experts in the development of needs assessments, which is basically a justification document for why a company should give grant money to put on that CE, because we all love free CE, right? But it has to get created and developed somehow. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make that happen. Same thing for paid, types of CMEs as well. We also do quite a bit in the blogging / consumer health space. And then finally in that scientific academic space, which is really just an overarching term, I guess, that I use for anything that's related to like journal articles, white papers, textbooks, books in general, which has been, a lot of fun.
Textbooks, boy, I had to buy a lot of those in college. Remember those days, Brittany?
Oh my gosh, yes. Actually, I have a funny story about that. So when I was in undergrad, I was a biology major, and the bookstore that year did a contest where they would pay for the full books for a semester for one student. And I happened, by the grace of God, to be that student that was chosen at random.
Congrats.
And so, thank you. And then after all of my textbooks that I needed for my biology major, the next year they stopped doing it because it cost so much to pay for all of the textbooks for my one semester. So a bit unfortunate. I think they changed it a little bit, but it kind of cracked me up that it was like one and done after that, just based on all the textbooks that you need as a science major.
Yeah, but that one semester, boy, that was golden, wasn't it?
Ooh, yes, it was.
I remember paying $500 or more per, I guess it was quarter at first. Then we switched to semesters back in the 90s. And boy, that was expensive. And 20 years later, I can only imagine what it's like. I don't know if they even need books anymore. Do you? I mean, everything's online.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you bring that up because my brother-in-law used like some program, like service online where he could just rent them or get them like, a quarter of the price of what we had to pay. We didn't have that option. We had to buy everything brand new. There wasn't a, buy a used book or use this online Google app thing that you can, access the books for without having to, have them in real life. So definitely progress, I think, has been made in that area for sure. But not something that I think you or I probably ever had the luxury of utilizing.
Nope. But that's one of those stories for the kids. Back in my day, this is what
Right.
we used to do. We used to get out a highlighter and you would highlight this important sentence. And then when you open the book, you go right to that because you know that's the important sentence.
Yep. Pink and yellow and orange, the good days.
Somebody listening to this is going to be smiling and nodding.
Yep. And if they're anything like me, everything had to be color coded. So I used my yellow highlighter for certain things, my pink highlighter for other things. I guess I'm giving away a little bit of my type A, craziness here, but it worked for me.
Hey, these are study tips that people could even use today if they really use print books. I remember having colored pencils, because we had to have them for some sort of a coloring book for anatomy and pathophysiology to shade in the organs. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And I loved it. But I was like, well, if I'm going to spend $8 on colored pencils, really good colored pencils, I'm going to use them for my notes too. And boy, those things were nubs by the time I graduated. But I would, even with my handwritten notes, nobody had a laptop back in the 90s when I went to pharmacy school. Yeah, back then I used to just take my colored pencils and my mechanical pencils because they didn't have pencil sharpeners sometimes in the classrooms. And I would just write my notes and they would be more colorful and it would draw my attention and easier to study. I don't know if anybody else out there did that, but yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
So anyways, textbooks. You have written parts of textbooks. Is that right?
Well, I have assisted with, I guess I have a case study that's in a textbook that is about migraine. I think our biggest project that we have worked on was the development of a abridged NAPLEX review book for student pharmacists. And that was a particularly meaningful project for me because I love working with students and I love giving back to the profession of pharmacy. I guess it's another way that I use my voice, which is advocating for the profession of pharmacy. So I'm on the board of the Illinois Pharmacists Association and just think it's so important that we have a say in our profession and where it's going. And so working with our future pharmacists is something that is a passion area for me and I love to do. So having the opportunity to work with APHA to create a member benefit for their student pharmacists was not only the highlight of my career, but also just amazing to give back to student pharmacists in that way to help them prepare for something that causes a lot of anxiety and fear for, getting licensed. So.
Yeah, that sounds like a great contribution to the profession. And thank you for the important work you do. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But it's really was a collaborative effort. So I have to give my team absolute kudos and props because we were tasked with creating this abridged version of the most important information that student pharmacists would want or need to know in that 2-week sweet spot before taking their NAPLEX, because you really just don't have the time to go back and do the full comprehensive review at that point. And they just took it in stride and created this massive abridged, book and trying to just consolidate all of that information and come up with what are the most important things that people need to know about each of the therapeutic areas. So I really give it to them and thank them for everything that they did to help us, put this out there and create that for students.
Wow. I don't know where I would begin if I had to do that. It would really be a team effort. Wow. Good for you. That's great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, some of the other things that you do involve CME, continuing medical education. Can you tell me some of the magazines or publications that those CMEs have been featured in?
Yeah, so a lot of our continuing medical education work is actually in the background. So we do the educational needs assessments, but we've also helped a lot recently with some of the companies that we've worked with, our Pharmacy Times, we've done quite a bit with American Journal of Managed Care, just providing various different types of deliverables in terms of CME But I would say the bulk of our work does fall in that educational needs assessment space. And I think that although it doesn't sound, because it's not published, that maybe it's not as important, but it really is, because it indirectly affects our patients, and making sure that our healthcare providers, whether it's pharmacists, physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, specialists, whomever it is, are staying up to date, and they have the most important information that they need in order to take care of their patients and help them with their outcomes. So in a way, I still get to affect patient care because of that. And we get to use our medical writing voices to help facilitate that. And I actually think that it requires a certain amount of understanding and realization of the importance of that, and to make sure that we're always attacking it with the most accurate information, the most up-to-date information, and from a ethical standpoint as well. So it really is a lot of responsibility, actually. And that's something that I teach my, medical writers that I work with that are on my team, of making sure that we have that every time we're working on a project, and that's instilled in all of us.
Your focus is certainly in the right place. I like what you were saying about the ethics, and the content has to be correct and everything. So I think you're doing it right. Yeah. I understand that you started your business, Banner Medical, as a solopreneur, but the company has grown. You mentioned team members. Can you tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about your team?
Yeah. So I love my team. They are just the most amazing group of pharmacist writers. And what's interesting is that, like you said, in 2015, I started out as a freelance medical writer. I called it my side hustle, opportunity to make some extra, money. Wanted to do more in my career, was working, in community pharmacy, and that was shortly after just, the job market was really terrible in 2012. And as a result, there just weren't a lot of opportunities. So, 3 years into working, I was just searching for something else to, pique my interest, and, what could I do? And so over, the time, I just kept getting more and more asks for, more projects. And I got to a point where I was like, well, I'm either going to have to scale back, or I'm going to have to figure out what the next steps are. And so I decided to bring on my first hire, which turned into my second hire. And now today we have over 20 pharmacists that work with us with Banner Medical. And I'm actually in my next phase of hiring, about to bring on probably another 10 to 15 writers onto the team, because we're just growing super fast. I have this saying, like, next level, same devil, of where, things get really, it's great to increase and build, but sometimes the hard part of entrepreneur is that people don't really talk about all of the things that happen on the back end. You just kind of see that highlight reel. But to your point, my team is amazing. I have people that specialize in a variety of different practice settings, which is really great for Banner, because it gives us this opportunity to have a very diverse voice, to be able to talk about any subject. And one of the things that I always share with our clients is that even though my pharmacists maybe don't all have, let's say, board certifications, or they're not experts in every single topic area, we have the ability to write like we are. And I think that's more important, and allows us to really create those lasting relationships with our clients. And my team really has been just an amazing force while I was pregnant and going through a lot of challenging things. I was in and out of the hospital throughout my entire pregnancy, just due to various issues that had come up, as well as having to go on medical leave early, and then, having a very difficult delivery. I talked recently about how I had to set important boundaries, for myself, and just realized that I couldn't do everything. And that was a scary moment of like, is Banner still going to be able to run and operate the way that it did, when I was at the helm of the ship, running everything. And they stepped in and just took care of things seamlessly, have exceeded my expectations across every step of the way. And I'm just so proud of them and so grateful for them every single day. And it's been wonderful to be able to bring a group of people together in that way and have us be able to just create work that is meaningful and that people appreciate and that actually helps make a difference.
Wow, that's amazing how everybody supported you in your time of need. That means you have the right team in place. Everybody's on the bus that should be there. And when you're not driving it, you've got a substitute driver.
Yeah, and it took a minute for me to like really be comfortable with owning that, of like figuring out who needed to be on the bus and being comfortable with like if somebody didn't really fit and us having to make changes, because especially as a female entrepreneur, I think there's a lot of pressure out there to just always be likable and have this idea of what you should be and how you should interact with people. And I'm certainly not advocating for being a jerk or being mean under any circumstances. Definitely not what I mean by that, but just being comfortable with having to make hard decisions and then moving forward and saying, you know what, hey, this didn't work out. I super, appreciate your time and your effort and everything that you put in towards, helping us here. But, we have to move on, and being able to, own that and decide, what works and what doesn't. And I think that was a big learning experience for me. But when you get it right, it's so amazing to have the right people, just on that bus with you to create and develop, and to have that space and that positive energy has been really, amazing. And I've loved that part of it. So I just feel very blessed to have the team that I do.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, you guys have the bus directed right straight through Awesomeville right there. You're going. We're
doing our best.
In addition to being a writer yourself and having this team, this growing team of writers, you also teach others how to become writers. And I understand you have at least 2 courses now on writing. And I've got to ask, do all these folks that you hire go through these courses, or do they come to you already with the knowledge they need to do the job?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. It's really twofold. So my courses came about from the teachings that I did with my team of when I first started this idea that I was going to bring on, additional writers to my team. That was a scary thing for me, because medical writing is really all about the relationships that you create and that you develop with your clients. And sometimes it can take a long time to nurture those and to really facilitate that process. And so for me, it was like all of the things came rushing in of like, oh, how am I going to teach someone to write like I do? Is that even possible? Are they going to be able to maintain the quality that is so important in this particular field? Because nobody has time to re-edit or spend hours and hours rewriting work or redoing work. And then, are they going to care as much as I do about the process and the importance of the ethics and just what I'm trying to do here with Banner Medical and my own company? And so because of that, I became very selective in who I brought on my team, which, took a second for me to be comfortable with and say, you know what, that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to, I don't have to be, open to every possible, opportunity out there. But, can I curate a great team that cares as much as I do? And so as part of that process, I took what I was teaching my team, that the individuals that I brought on, the mentorship that happens with Banner Medical, because I didn't have any of that when I first started as a freelancer. It was just kind of, trial by fire, I think is the saying that goes out there. And I learned things the hard way, did things wrong, and had to, figure it out as I went. And so with my team, I really try to encourage things going beyond just a transactional process. So, we know each other, by name. We know our backgrounds, our stories. We really try to create that family environment with Banner. So the courses came after the fact because of that what I was able to create inside of Banner for duplicating that writing process and being able to keep that quality. But then also because I've had so many people reach out and ask, I'm so interested in medical writing, tell me everything you know about medical writing and how do I do what you do? And which is wonderful and flattering. And I love talking to people and having, those conversations with people that want to become medical writers that are, pharmacists or even non-pharmacists who want to be medical writers. But, this has been a 6-year journey at this point. And so it just wasn't possible to break down everything that I had done in that 6-year process or even earlier than that. With new inquiring people about the field. And so it's been fun to take all of those lessons learned, some really, really hard lessons and some amazing lessons, and put that into, 2 courses. So my second course is going to be dropping the beginning of the year. It's called Writing Jumpstart. And this is really for pharmacists that just aren't sure about medical writing. They think maybe it's something that they're interested in. And we kind of walk through those 5 key areas that I see that will really help people decide if they want to go into medical writing. And then I have my larger course, which ironically I created first, Medical Writing Mastery, which is really a all-encompassing program to help pharmacists from start to finish of creating their own medical writing businesses or side hustles if they wish to just do things on the side like I did when I first started. It's been learned a lot of lessons of creating a course. A lot harder than I anticipated, but it's been fun to interject my own personal stories in there and just help people, go beyond the traditional boxes. And, there really is so much more to pharmacy than the 3 traditional boxes that we're all taught about and is ingrained in us in school, that these are your options: community, hospital, and ambulatory care. And pharmacists are amazing individuals. They are capable of so much. So it's really been amazing to see people go through the course, and even my own writers too. I was just talking about this the other day of, obviously I would love to keep all of my writers always and have them always work for Banner, but it is such a compliment to me when they get to move on and take a new position, or maybe they take a full-time position in medical writing or go to that next step in their career as a result of, what they've learned and the process of, what they've been doing in Banner. And so that is especially meaningful to me too, even though I would love to keep them and I miss them. It's great to see that. And I think that's been an exciting piece of this as well that I never anticipated when, I first started.
You are developing talent is what you are doing. That's how I call it. That's something my husband actually really enjoys doing too. And he didn't even realize it, much like you. He didn't even realize that he liked doing it until he was so proud of them when he left his previous job and they were still there and they were rocking. They were doing awesome. Excuse me. Some people think it's the sign of a good leader when the leader leaves and everything falls apart because they were such a good leader that, they were not replaceable. But my husband kind of teaches the opposite, where if you have developed your talent the right way, they're going to fly because you taught them well. And that's what you've done. And you deserve a lot of credit for doing that if they're moving on and doing good things in addition to what they've done for you. You've taught them well.
Well, thank you. I don't know that I am comfortable taking the credit, but I definitely agree with, with your husband. I think it's so important to uplift, people around you. Nobody wants to be in that environment where it's constantly competitive and, I think there's a time and place for that, certainly, but I think it's so much more reflective of having a great boss or a great leader if they can bring you up with them or help uplift you in some way. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I learned from the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And I think for me, mentorship has a time and a place. in this world. But if you can find someone that's a sponsor that's willing to put themselves out there and uplift you in that way, then that's even more important, because it's mentorship is very much a one direction type of relationship. You go to the mentor for, whatever it is that you're receiving the mentorship, that relationship capacity. But with a sponsorship, it's very bi-directional. So both of you are getting something from that encounter, in that interaction. And when somebody is willing to, vouch for you in a way, that is very meaningful. And I think it's not only meaningful to the person that is the sponsor, but then also the individual. There's trust essentially that's created and developed there. And I have been able and fortunate to do the things that I've done in my career from having sponsors versus mentorships. And don't get me wrong, I've had mentors out there as well, which are very important too. But I think when you can develop those sponsor type relationships, it's also important. And I've had medical writers come and say, hey, you know what, I want to apply for this position. Would you be willing to give me a good reference? Or, would you be willing to talk about what it is that I've done, with Banner? And I'm always, very happy to do that and to assist them with that, because, you just never know. The world is a small place, right? What
Yes.
one person does today, they could be your boss tomorrow or in the future. And so I think it's important that we uplift one another and just leave that trail of positivity whenever possible.
Yes. And I'm going to lead right into how you're an advocate for entrepreneurship for women in pharmacy from there, because I think that kind of goes along with what you're saying,
Well, I think it's really important as women, we have, I talk about this actually in my IVF book that I'm working on, and some of the emotions that I had to go through and process with just my body not doing what I thought it should be doing, like the one biological thing that I'm supposed to be able to do, and it didn't work. And just those emotions that come up as a result of that. And I think it's an interesting segue to being female and advocating for women in pharmacy and just women in general. I've had the opportunity to do that in a couple different instances now of just, helping women realize that our skill sets are valuable, and that, yes, we've had to, go through a variety of different things throughout history. But we've made great progress. And this came up when I was doing research for my IVF book of why women internalize it and make it so personal about, when that happens and your body doesn't do what it's supposed to. This is the one job that, I'm supposed to be able to do. And here I am feeling defective because it's not doing what what it's supposed to be. But interestingly, and I didn't even know this. I think as a female being raised by two strong women. My mom was a single mom, and my grandmother was born in 1938, had polio. And despite, being told that she should be a housewife and stay at home, she said, heck no, and got multiple degrees and, was independent and an amazing role model, somebody that I absolutely look to every day and keeps me humble in all that she has done. But women couldn't even have their own checking account or go to school on their own or make their own medical decisions in some cases until the 60s. And I didn't even realize that in some of these cases that we didn't even have those basic rights until, so late. And my grandmother was born in 1938 and my mom was born in 1964. And just thinking about that and really processing that was such a journey to think through of all the things that I'm able now to do as, a third generation daughter, that my grandmother, this living, breathing 83-year-old woman that is the light of my life, had to fight against all of those things. And then you add on top of it, women of color and how much more difficult it is for them. on top of everything. And it just makes me so proud to see how far we've come. One of my favorite things that I'm a part of now is a group called Pharmacist Women, that's run by Dr. Chara Reed. And she is just a force to be reckoned with, and decided that, you know what, the voice of women is valuable, and it's something that we need to support and value, and we need to uplift one another and make sure that we are on each other's side and not tearing one another down. And so it's something that I try to participate in on a regular basis, and whenever possible, to try to uplift the women around me and to make sure that they know that their skill sets are valuable, and how far we've come and how much work we still maybe have to do. And there's quite a bit, I would say, but it's an amazing time to, be able to just live that and do the best that we can, and, help support one another to be the best that we can be.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with supporting and encouraging other women pharmacists, especially entrepreneurs. And I'd like to know, how can someone get involved with that women pharmacist group that you mentioned from Chara Reed?
Yeah, so she has, it started out in Illinois, and, there's a Facebook group called Pharmacist Women. So you can, if you're on Facebook or even LinkedIn, you can find the Pharmacist Women group. And it is open, as far as I know, to all, women pharmacists. We even have, I believe, technicians that have entered into the group as well, and student pharmacists too. So it's not just, you don't have to just be a pharmacist, to my knowledge, but you can absolutely join that group, get involved. I think she tries to do virtual networking opportunities each month, in addition to in person. I think right now the in person are primarily in the Chicagoland area, but I do think she has big plans to expand that out further across the country and help create additional opportunities in other states and getting that, rolling as well. So I would definitely start with that Facebook group and, go from there.
Well, thank you for telling me about that. I'm not sure that I'm in that one yet. I know I'm in the Pharmacist Moms Facebook group, but I don't know about the Pharmacist Women Facebook group. I'll have to check that out. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I can send you an invite. We'll make it super easy.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Because I'll tell you, I get busy and sometimes I forget about stuff.
Totally understand. Now that I've got, that mom fog brain on top of it too, I got to write stuff down, or it just isn't going to happen.
My kids are older and I think I've still got the brain fog. Now, speaking of having a family and being a mom, here's a question for you. I know that from listening to other interviews that you've done for podcasts, I've heard that you are one busy gal and you work full-time as a pharmacist, or at least prior to maternity leave. You worked full-time in community practice, 40 hours a week, and then did another 40 hours a week, at least, on Banner Medical. So now that you've had a baby, do you mind if I ask how things are going to change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had to really think about that pre-giving birth and what that was going to look like. And what I came up with was leaning more on my team and being able to set those boundaries and be comfortable with, delegating some of those additional tasks. So I don't know that I have it 100% figured out what that's going to look like just yet. I think we're working through that as we go, of what works and, what doesn't. But I do hope to continue on a bit of the process that we have now of having the daily operations of Banner being managed a bit more by my team, and me being able to step more in that fully like CEO role, as opposed to CEO, project manager, quality assurance, like all the things, because it is impossible. I have this tiny human that I'm now responsible for, have a husband that, I still need to make sure that I have time for, and then, obviously taking care of my patients in my, pharmacy job as well. So there are exciting things to come, but I think it's kind of a hybrid model at the moment of figuring out things as I go a little bit, as well as kind of pre-planning and being comfortable with letting my team take over some of those things that I used to do, and trusting, and believing that they're going to execute and do amazing. And they have 100% the whole way. So I have complete faith in them as we go through this next transition and phase in life, that it'll be even better than it was before.
Yes, it can be just as great as before, just different. And I'm glad that you have that growth mindset. Some people are just in their shell, like, please don't make me change. Like, but babies change everything. And you have this open mind that your team that you love so much is going to just support you in whatever you decide to do. And I wish you luck with all the decisions that lay before you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I think it's an important lesson too, for any aspiring entrepreneurs out there. Anyone that's going to be an entrepreneur has a little bit of a risk taker in them, right? Because there's no guarantee that things are going to work, or that they're even going to go a particular way. And I think just being able, and maybe it's my community pharmacy background too, of just, being used to dumpster fire all the time, of just how do you work through those things? How do you strategize? How do you come up with solutions in the moment of, when things don't go the way that you expect them to? But it's one of the best things about being an entrepreneur, is that you get to figure it out, and you don't always succeed. And we talked a little bit about this before, of seeing the highlight reels of, the people around you. And even this podcast, you're hearing me talk about all the great, amazing things, but there's also a lot of difficult times too. And it can be hard, and being an entrepreneur can be isolating. And that's why I also think it's so important to surround yourself with people that can uplift you and help you through those difficult times and figure that stuff out. One of the biggest things that was life altering for me was hiring a business coach, and just having someone that I could bounce ideas off of, or that could help me work through those scary times, like deciding to hire my first writer for Banner Medical. Like, I was terrified. There's no way I can do this. How would I possibly be able to teach someone to do the things that I do? Like, they're not in my brain. So how is that going to translate and still come up with the same, quality? And, it's just really important to not lose sight of, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into any business that's created. And that, the good times are great, but there's also, difficult times, and how you work through that and manage that is just as important to being successful. And it's okay to fail. There have been times where I just was like, wow, this didn't work out, or this disaster happened, and, just figuring it out of how do we move forward? And a lot of times it can feel like you see the people around you that are doing amazing things, that are just going up this ladder in like one direction, when really it's very much a zigzag for any entrepreneur that's out there. There's no perfect, start to finish, process.
I'm smiling big because I'm so with you on that. I get asked to be on other podcasts. I get interviewed for things, and people want the highlight reel. They want to know, how did you go from point A to point B? They don't know about the coaching and the blood, sweat, and tears. And I'm not saying they don't get it. I'm just saying they just don't know about it, because I don't post pictures on Instagram of me talking to myself in a studio and making a mistake and having to press the space bar and back it up to where I made the mistake and press the record button and roll over it,
Yeah.
It's not
absolutely.
glamorous, and it takes time to set up a camera and, shoot all that stuff. But yeah, that happens, and it happens a lot. And you need to put yourself before people to be judged too. And sometimes you're going to fall on your face. I can't tell you how many auditions that I've done in the past few years, and I don't get most of them. And people don't know that, because all they hear is that, oh, she works for pharma and biotech, and she narrates audiobooks for women pharmacist authors. And I can't tell you how many pitches that I've done, direct marketing, and it's gone badly. And I'm not saying I've said stupid stuff. It's just I wasn't right for that. And you just have to have a short memory about it, learn something from it for God's sakes, and move forward.
Yeah.
But we were talking before the recording started about imposter syndrome a little bit. And I was telling Brittany, I have a terrible case of imposter syndrome. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about that and how it relates to entrepreneurship, because people got to hear that even you, who's very successful, have some imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the most normal things about just life in general, right? Like we all are looking for validation in some form or, way. And, depending on our upbringings and just how we navigate through life can really affect that. And I'm no stranger to that either. There's been moments where I was like, oh, can I really do that? Or, ooh, are people, really gonna like when my book, the APHA NAPLEX review book came out, I was a little scared. Like, are my colleagues going to go through this and find a mistake or something that we did wrong or that we didn't get right? And then I was like, oh, wait, we had that peer review process and we've put, every effort into making sure that this book is going to be great and, helpful for student pharmacists. Or are the student pharmacists even going to like the book and find it helpful? And so I think that's really just normal, and it's important to normalize that, but also to help pharmacists just not get stuck in the weeds either of not being ever, not ever saying yes or not ever moving forward because of that fear. And I really unpack this in my medical writing courses as well, of trying to work through that process with them, that, it's really not the fear of failure, but the fear of shame that oftentimes is what holds people back from the things that they want to do or to, start. Because, in general, pharmacists are typically very successful, high achieving individuals. And we get used to that feeling of success and wanting to always do the best we can. So what I see oftentimes, and this is, most, I guess, applicable to medical writing, but pharmacists that just think that they need all the information, right? I need 6 different, 6 more certificates. I need to do this, or I need to do that. And I need all the information before I could even possibly start. And it's like, let's take a step back and take a time out. And let's talk about, what are you good at right now? You have your PharmD or your BS Pharm. That's a very valuable skill set that you have taken time and blood, sweat, and tears. Here we are again to, earn that. And that in of itself is something, and that is enough before we start going on to the 10 other things that you're thinking of right now that you need in order to get started. You don't, you just have to start. And all those, other things that you think you need, maybe you won't need. And maybe there's new things that you actually might need that will be more valuable, once you get started. And so we work through that process as well of just, getting rid of that misconception that you need all these things in order to be successful when you really don't. And I'll tell you, I've never had a client once turn me down at this point because I didn't have a medical writing certificate or I didn't have a board certification related to, the writing that I'm doing. I think the type of writing and how you write is much, much more important than all the bells and whistles and all the, various credentials, that you could have. Obviously, if you have credentials, that's great. And you have an area of expertise. For me, it's immunizations and women's health are the 2 areas that I absolutely love and an interest area for me. So I can write on that without, in most cases, having to look a lot of things up. Or I have pharmacists on my team that specialize in HIV or oncology. Those things are certainly beneficial, and it will help you determine where you want to start with your writing and your voice, and something that I teach, my pharmacists about, but it doesn't preclude you from having other opportunities or being able to do, more based on that. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I feel like I could give my own little TED talk on this topic, because it really does affect people, and it makes them feel insecure and like they're not enough. And I'm here saying, no, you are enough. Like, you have everything you need to get started. And maybe there's a few areas that we can brush up on and perfect and, make you feel more confident in, but you don't have to know everything or do everything before you can even get started.
Well, I'll tell you, you have piqued my interest in becoming a medical writer. I know I'm the pharmacist voice, and people would think of that as a speaking voice. But when I started the company, I also thought maybe I could use my voice as a writer as well. So when that basic course comes out, I don't know how much it's going to cost, but if I can afford it, I will be taking it because I am interested. And we did talk about imposter syndrome. You had some wonderful points. I had to refrain from saying, preach, girl. But here's the thing. I have a BS Pharm. I don't have a PharmD. I don't have any letters after my name, board certifications and whatnot. And I actually don't feel bad about it at all.
No, absolutely not.
So I am interested in the writing piece, but I'll tell you, guess what I'm really good at writing?
What?
Show notes for podcasts.
Well, and that's important because, not everyone who does podcasts wants to do that. A lot of people hate writing. I'll share a little funny story with you. When I first started medical writing, it really wasn't as mainstream as it is now. And this is just like 6 years ago. I had to have my own little elevator speech, my own kind of pitch. Like even my colleagues were like, what the heck is that? Like, what are you talking about? And because of that, I had to get very comfortable with explaining, what it was that I was doing. And I always typically got two reactions like, oh, that's cool. Like, interesting. Or, oh my God, I hate writing so much. And I can tell you, I probably got the second one more often than the first one of
how kind of them.
Just despise, writing. I've come to learn that I'm a bit of an anomaly in that instance. I had go back to my grandmother. She was a librarian and taught me how to read and just created that love for books and for writing and just, all things in that arena. Very grateful to her for that, for helping to, develop that skill set in me early on. But, because of that, it's a skill set that's needed. And that's, I guess maybe another nugget that we can share with people is that, it's very easy to want to think of just any possible business that you could come up with out of, whatever the motivation is, whether it's, being unhappy in a current job or not feeling fulfilled or, whatever the issue is. But that doesn't necessarily translate to a successful business. You have to solve somebody's problem. So if you can find a problem that's out there that needs solving, that's going to make somebody else's life easier or better, then that is what you need to be doing. And it happened to me by accident, as most, entrepreneurial endeavors do. They start out by, just figuring something out by accident. And I was like, wow, people really don't like writing. I happen to do it pretty well. I think I've now, there's that imposter syndrome, right? In the beginning, now I can confidently say like, yeah, I write really good. Like this is something I am an expert in. And being able to take that and turn it into a business that solves somebody else's problem is really, the golden space. And that's what you need to do and figure out and, just find a way to, make that helpful for you and helpful for somebody else. And you're never going to have a problem finding work, and people will keep coming back to you, and you'll create those core clients. So you don't constantly have to hustle all the time for that next job is important. And those are some of the things that we, work through in my larger course for sure. And we touch on in the smaller course too. And I promise the smaller course will be affordable. I want it to be something that is just every person out there could have access to, and not, limit those introductory concepts for people. It's not really something that I intend to make a ton of money on, my smaller course, but really more of a, an opportunity for people to get their feet wet and figure out, is this the right place for me? Does it make sense? Is this something that I actually really like? Before you drop, thousands and thousands of dollars on, some of these medical writing tuition courses are, $10,000, 10K plus, or even 3-day courses. In some cases for a certificate can be, a couple $1,000s. So, and it doesn't necessarily even guarantee you that you're going to get work either. And I think that's one of the biggest points that people miss. And so for me, it's another way to give back and to help uplift people into, a non-traditional career that maybe they'll love doing like I do.
Great advice. Great advice. I'm going to back up just a little bit. A little while ago, you talked about having gotten some coaching yourself. And I know it's not an online course that you went to, because I think you were talking about having a conversation with somebody. Would you mind revealing who that is and what came out of that?
Yeah. Well, so I have actually had 2 coaches at this point, which is something that I never anticipated, that I would do. In fact, when I first came across the idea of a coach, it was 3:00 in the morning. I was having trouble sleeping, just one of those restless nights of thinking about my life and where things were going and what I wanted to do and just how I wanted to do more, but there just weren't really opportunities. And had some success with, getting my freelance, jobs and all of that. And I came across an article, that was written, and I just went through it. And from the creator of the Happy PharmD, Alex and I started working together before, and he's doing amazing now. Actually, it's unbelievable the number of pharmacists that he's been able to help. But I was joined him, I guess, in the early days of the Happy PharmD and what his mission was and what he was doing. And in the beginning, I thought about, okay, does coaching make sense? We have coaches for athletics. People. There's a very real purpose to that. And at the time that I had decided to work with Alex, the cost of the coaching was half of what I made that year. So it was a significant investment in myself, and just, having that MBA degree, like thinking through that opportunity cost of like, oh, what could I do with like those funds that I'm now going to put into reinvesting in myself? But Alex made me believe in him and that he really cared about what I was trying to do and what was important. And where I wanted to go, with my business. And it was the best investment I ever made in myself. The next year alone, I tripled my revenue from where I was the previous year, and then, kept going on and on until I hit a multiple 6-figure business. And, at a certain point, it's important to also recognize when there's other additional things that you need beyond that first coaching experience. So Alex and I worked together very closely, and I ended up after some time, a few years of going on with a new coach whose name is Joy Bufalini, and she is all about her program Simplify to Multiply. And I since then went into her $1 million business coaching program as well. So I've had a couple opportunities to entertain coaches, one that was a pharmacist, one that wasn't, in order to help me work through some of those roadblocks and just the different things that come up as an entrepreneur and business decisions that you need to make, and just to think through some of those things and to have someone that's an outside perspective on, what it is that you're doing, where you want to go, how you get there, how you execute on those things can be, absolutely invaluable. And it certainly was for me. And although I joke with Alex about how in the beginning, I wasn't really sure that it made sense or that it was something that would, work. And God, I don't even know how I talked my husband into letting me spend the money that I needed to at the time. Him and I, not that I needed his permission, but we have this where if we spend over $100, we talk about it and agree that it's a worthwhile, expenditure, just so that we're not, going crazy and staying within our budget and things. But
we do something similar at my house. I'm just saying ours is $200 though, but still it's not a whole lot of money, and you got to have a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to be respectful, I guess, of your partner and make sure that you guys are on the same page when it comes to finances. That's a huge a huge lesson and something that I think has allowed our marriage to be successful and not have those, financial disagreements, I guess, so to speak. But yeah, I'm maybe getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but in short, coaching is absolutely valuable. It's something that I think all pharmacists can benefit from, whether you have a business or not, to, just help you figure out what it is that you want to do. And he's not the only one out there. There's lots of pharmacist coaches. There's Christina Fontana. There's also Jerika Dodd. Both of those are also coaches that I highly respect and that are doing amazing things in addition to Alex. And I think it's really about finding the right coach for you and who you think is going to be able to help you succeed and do the things that you want to do and actually be honest with you. Nobody wants like a yes man or a yes woman, right? You need someone that's going to challenge you.
Yes.
And force you to think outside of the box, make those hard decisions. And there's been multiple times with both of the coaches that I've worked with where they've been like, okay, Brittany, are you really being honest with yourself? Are you really, committed to what it is that you're saying? And in each of those times where that's come up and I've had to take a step back and, think through that, has always led to something positive happening as a result of that. That and my husband has always been, I think, a huge supporter, which has been crucial to my success too. And when I get in those moments where things are really difficult and I'm feeling sorry for myself, because let's be honest, we've all been there and we all do that from time to time, right? He always lights a fire under me by saying, if it were easy, everyone would do it. And in the moment, that tends to, kind of annoy me. I'm stubborn and, hard-headed, but I'll tell you, it's very effective of just thinking through that of like, oh yeah, there's no guarantee that life is going to be easy. Right. And if it were easy, you would see everybody, out here doing it. And I think that's an important lesson too. And little nugget that my husband, is definitely responsible for of, just helping me in those times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have got this, and this is so hard. And why has it got to be like this? And oh my goodness, what am I going to do? How am I going to figure this out? And usually it's, hey, you will figure it out. And if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. So go figure it out.
Right. There are so many things in life that we need a coach for. And it sounds like you needed Alex, but I got to ask, has Alex ever referred any of his clients to you who might be interested in becoming medical writers?
Yeah, actually, so when I started medical writing mastery, it was really because of him. He was like, you need to do this. Like, you need to. And I was like, I don't know, like, are people really going to be interested? Would they even want to, work with me? And so medical writing mastery started with him and was actually on, his platform. And so he has been just as much of a champion of me as I am of him at this point. And actually, just the other day, one of his head coaches sent an introductory email to me of like, hey, this person's really interested in medical writing. They would love to learn more about it, XYZ, and, let's have let you guys have a conversation from here. And that happens, quite a bit, and vice versa. I think you end up with kind of that symbiotic relationship. And actually in medical writing mastery, we have the opportunity for anyone who goes through that program to have a coaching session with the Happy PharmD as a result, because I do, put, I guess, my money where my mouth is of just how important I think that is. So it's built into my program directly. And so we're able to share, clients, I guess, back and forth in that way, which is also, great for both of our businesses. But it also serves a greater purpose of helping people have a little extra help along the way too.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that worked out for you. That's great to have professional acquaintances that can send work one another's way.
Yeah, referrals is so important. And I'm sure you can speak to that probably even more, than I can too, just in your, role as the pharmacist voice that, if you go through, I guess, phases, and at least I did with Banner, where I was just searching and hustling for all of those jobs in the beginning. And then now, I don't really have to do that because I have referrals and people that are sent to me directly, maybe from a previous client that I worked with or some other acquaintance that I have. And that networking component is so important to the process as well. And just, can be difficult for some people and scary if you're more introverted or, if you're an extrovert, sometimes you can be overconfident. And, we all have those pitfalls that sometimes we need to work through. But, that is a really important concept to being an entrepreneur and being able to create those relationships and not just, and this is something that I guess I'll leave maybe the audience with of, it's really important before you ask for something to make sure that you can give something first. And so what I mean by that is I'm more swayed by the people that reach out to me that say, hey, I'm so-and-so, we have this connection. This is what I do, in my job. And this is how I think I can help you and help Banner. Versus the individuals that say, hey, I want to medical write, can you give me a job? It's two very different approaches. And I think the way you network is really important versus, just clicking accept for, a on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever social media platform you're using. Do you take the time to send a message to that person, to introduce yourself, to let them know who you are and why, you're reaching out to them? It's great for us all to have followers and people that like, the content that we create or, whatever it is that we're doing, but are you taking that extra step to really create relationships? And I think that's essential in this day and age and really, really important.
I agree. Yes. These are life lessons that are best learned, I think, from somebody who's already doing it well. And I can tell that you are. When I connect with somebody, I often like to say something about, who I am and what I do. But then I also like to say something along the lines of I like to connect with other creatives, so that they know, oh, that's the connection, the reason. But other people may not be as intentional. I love your advice about offering something first. I think that's a really great method of making connections. You try to give first before you receive.
Yeah, it's always served me well. And I think, it just goes back to solving somebody else's problem, right? Of, what can you do for them before asking for something for yourself? And maybe it's just my Midwestern like nature as well of, not just always wanting to to help and be, be friendly. But it really has helped me create and cultivate those relationships. I, going on maternity leave, have had, multiple clients send us gifts and be so excited for us and the journey that we've gone through. And that's because I've been open with them. I've worked really hard to create those relationships that go beyond just a transactional, basis. They were begging for pictures and threatened me if I didn't share baby pictures that I was going to be in trouble. So, though that's what you want to create because you develop that trust and that relationship with those clients to where they don't even think about, potentially working with somebody else because you are their person. And there's just a lot of wisdom in that of working on creating that relationship first and then getting to the business part of it, later. And if you can do that and you may stumble at first, and that's okay. No one's perfect. It took me a minute to figure out the best way of going about that. But, if you take it from that approach, I guarantee you that you're going to find clients and people are going to want to work with you. And then believe me, I have been rejected so many times. Like you said earlier in our discussion, I can totally empathize with that. There's still times today where, I don't get the job or somebody else, quotes a lower price than, what I do. So they get the work. But I think it's important to remember that not every client is for you either. And that it's important that you are paid for, your work at a valuable rate and that, we don't, another pet peeve, I guess, of mine that I see a lot is people doing work for free. And it's fine if there's a purpose to it. If you're trying to maybe get your name out there, or maybe it's something for the greater good, and it serves a purpose for doing it. But there's so many writers, and particularly pharmacists, that come to me that are like, oh yeah, I've been doing, 5,000 word articles on, X job site for, $200. And I'm like, what? Like, let's take a step back and let's think through this for a second. You're a pharmacist, first of all. So, how long did it take you to do that piece, that 5,000, words? To give the audience an idea, 1,000 words is roughly 2 pages. Okay. So we're, talking about a 10-page document that is quite an undertaking, depending on what it is. And just remember that, you're a pharmacist, you worked hard for that degree, your skill sets are valuable, and we need to change that immediately. And, working through those things. So, it's, I guess, a long about answer to say that, it's important. It's just important to cultivate those relationships, to make sure that you are valued for what you're doing, but how you do it makes a big difference.
I agree. I know we're kind of bouncing around with subjects, going from LinkedIn to talking about building relationships because you have to negotiate a fair rate and all that. But let's talk about how you use your voice to negotiate a rate. I know in the industry that I'm in now, the voiceover industry, you as an individual are responsible for negotiating your own rate. Is that kind of how it works with medical writers?
Yeah, yes and no. Money is always such a touchy subject. And this is another thing that I like to advocate with women about, especially because in most cases, in my experience, the women pharmacists that I have worked with have so much baggage around money and asking for a particular rate, or feeling comfortable with being valued at a particular rate. And so it's really important, because I think oftentimes we just think that we should accept whatever is given to us and be grateful that, somebody has offered us a job, and that's fine. But I think it's also important to think through negotiation skills and how you can advocate for yourself and to be paid fairly for the work that you're doing. So in my courses, for example, I generally do not, in most cases, advocate for going to the job sites, because there's tons and tons and tons of people that are essentially bidding for the same jobs. And in most cases, you're going to end up with very large pieces that are paying you for like pennies when you figure out, how much they're asking for and what you're doing. Obviously, there's exceptions to everything. And I'm not saying you can't make a good living there if that's how you choose to. But for me personally, it's not the route that I've taken. And I think the negotiation skills become crucial when it comes to the rates that you're choosing or that you set for yourself, because it's a fine line between not charging enough and people not taking you seriously, and overcharging and essentially losing out on work because your rates are just completely out of touch for the marketplace. So you need to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle, where you're still being paid fairly for the work that you're doing, and being comfortable with owning that. And if people choose not to work with you because your rate is out of their budget, then that's okay. They just weren't your client. They weren't the right client for you in that moment, because it's so much more stressful to do a bunch of work and not be paid fairly for the, what you're doing, than it is to just say no to a client and wait for that next one to come that is going to pay you the fair rate that you deserve, and that, is what you should be making. And so I think that was a learning process for me as well in the beginning, of like being comfortable saying, you know what, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we can come to an agreement on a, rate that's going to be beneficial for both of us. And, if that changes and you decide that you want to work with us, you know where to find me, essentially. And I've had to walk away from one large client, actually, as a result of that, which in the beginning can feel really, tough and harsh, because you're losing a big chunk of money. But I'll tell you, every time that I've done that, it has come back, double or 5 times or whatever the amount is by sticking to my principles as far as like the fair wage and paying, appropriately. And I do that with my team too. It's something that I feel very strongly about, is making sure that they're paid fairly. So there's no way that I can accept jobs that are underpaying us, because then I can't pay my team what's appropriate for them. So yes, we do have to negotiate our own rate, and it tends to vary depending on the scope of the project, who the client is, what it is that they're looking for. The medical writing field, there really isn't like a set pay scale, so to speak. So it really does, it is individualized based on what you're doing, experience and quality. And I think that's what I play up, especially with my team, is the ability, you're getting what you pay for, essentially. Yes, I'm not the cheapest. No, I'm also not the most expensive out there, but you are going to get what you pay for. And I've had, clients come back to me and say, oh my gosh, we went with a different writer and it just did not turn out the way that I wanted. I have so much work I have to do. Now I need to find someone in a scramble to fix this. Can you help us? And because of that, we've helped fix work of, other projects that didn't work out. And, I think ultimately, people realize that you get what you pay for. And if, unfortunately, sometimes they have to learn the hard way, but, they will come back if they've had a bad experience, or they decide, what, the work that they do is really good. And, I'm going to go with them the first time, so I don't have to have these problems, going forward. So, definitely negotiation is a huge learning experience. And it's something that we need to be comfortable with and learn how to do as well. So that you get paid fairly for the work that you're doing in any, business, unless you got a, fee for service or like a commodity type of product where there's a set price for something. When you're in these more nebulous type of entrepreneurial roles, it can be scary, but I'm sure you've had maybe some similar experiences where you've had to, stick to your guns and say, nope, this is what it is. And, figure it out, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I like your term nebulous that you just used. I think of a blob without borders. And sometimes that's what these jobs are. I don't want to embarrass anybody that might be listening that's ever contacted me for a job, but I've had people contact me and say, for example, our in-house guy will do this 2-hour e-learning course for $150. How much would you do it for? Yeah. And my question is, what's your budget? Is it really $150? And how many words do you expect to come out of my mouth? Yeah. I won't say it like that, but I get paid per word in a lot of cases. If it's medical heavy, it's going to be 45, 50 cents a word. It depends on how much prep work I have to do for it too. Okay. If it's an audiobook, that's different, because it's a set thing. And with e-learning, you often have to label individual files. And I'm sure that with you and your medical writing, you've got all kinds of paragraph headers and all kinds of, format issues. It depends on how much it costs or how much time it takes me to format something too. So voiceover is more than just me sitting in front of a microphone with a script. Is so much more. But yes, nebulous indeed. I got lowballed with a $150 offer for 2 hours worth of work. I'm trying to think how many words that I could speak in 2 hours, probably like 18,000 or something, 18,000 words at 50 cents a pop. I don't know. It's going to be $9,000 or something. They want to have me just accept 150. We don't even go any further than that. They don't show me a script. They don't tell me how many words. I say no right away. We move on. So to answer your question, yes, I've done things like that. And I've had people offer me more than $10,000 for a project, and they never show me the script. So we never go any further than that. It's like, I think they just know if it's going to cost them more than $10,000, they don't even want to play the game. So that's fine. That's fine. But, you have to be a boss babe when it comes to being an entrepreneur. If somebody offers you a certain amount of money, you got to get in the ring and you got to fight for it.
Yeah. And not be afraid to go back and renegotiate either. I think that's another important tip too, that, if you both have an agreement on what you think the scope of the project is and what the work's going to require, and it ends up being more than that, or something changes, or we've had projects that were very intricate. For example, we do a lot of work in rare diseases, and there's not always a playbook for treatment guidelines for rare diseases, depending on how rare it is, or what the circumstances are, what the client is focusing on for that particular project. And so there's been many instances where we've had to go back and say, hey, you know what? We thought, this was going to, take this much time or this much effort, but it actually is taking a lot more than we expected. And, we need to talk about, the rate and adjusting that based on, what the circumstances are. And I think that's another important piece of it too, of being able to advocate for yourself and your business, and recognizing, when those moments come up, and not being afraid to have the conversation, because what's the worst that can happen, right? They can say no. And if that happens, okay, fine. There's no guarantee that they're going to agree to paying you more, or that, they're going to even be, open to that. But you have to get over the fear of asking, because in many cases, and in most cases, from what I've, experienced, they're always open to it, because they value the work that you're doing, and they want you to have, they want to get the best product back possible. And so I think that's also an important piece too of that negotiation process that we forget about, is that it's okay if things are different than what you anticipate. I mean, we see that with cars all the time. My husband loves to watch like restoration shows about cars. They think, and they'll get into a project and think that, they're going to need X amount of dollars for, restoring the vehicle. And then, maybe the seats are completely, unsalvageable, or they have to do so much more body work than anticipated. And they have to go back to the owner and say, hey, this is where we're at, and we're going to need more funds. And I think that translates over to all types of businesses. We've all had those moments where that's come up, and not being afraid to, go back and have a conversation.
Yeah, like with me, it would be a script change after they've already given me the final. And then I have to renegotiate a little bit of something,
Yep.
word count, whatever, or if it's a complete rewrite, I get paid for whatever they initially had me do that I finished,
Yep.
plus whatever the rewrite is. Do you ever have that happen?
Yeah, we actually just recently had this happen with a client who we're working on a book chapter with them, and they had wanted some additional, edits and changes after the initial project agreement. And so, we went back and had a discussion about it. It was super easy, and now have done those edits for them. And as a result, we had to adjust the fee structure a little bit, but it was an easy process. It wasn't even something that I was scared about, at this point, having, done that many times. But it happens regularly, probably more than people would think, because things come up, things change. We've had instances where we completed a project and the client said, hey, you know what, there's brand new data that came out and we need to add in XYZ to this now. Can you do that at your hourly rate, for us? And so it happens quite frequently. And that's why I think it's so important for people to get comfortable with those discussions and, figure out how you work if it is a barrier for you. Get some good tools and resources to help navigate through that, so it's less scary and more of a approachable subject for them.
Tools and resources are so important. What are some of the tools and resources you use most often?
It's definitely a gap area out there for negotiation. And so I have tried to collate a variety of things in my medical writing courses to help, pharmacists that are interested to do that. I think one of the biggest resources and tools that helped me was having a coach, and just someone that could bounce ideas off of with me, make me feel more comfortable and confident in what it was that I was doing. So I would say that was number one. I think number two is just more of that professional development, self-awareness piece for yourself of, being comfortable and working through anything that comes up for you. I mean, we all have things that affect us and how we make decisions in our life. For example, I'll share a personal story with you. I was robbed in 2019 in my pharmacy. It was a very difficult and albeit traumatizing experience to go through. And, because of that, it didn't hit me initially of how much it affected me. It kind of hit me months later, like 4 months later to be exact. And,
Wow.
was listening to a song and I just bursted out in tears. And I was like, okay, this is not normal. Like, what's going on with me? And I found myself just getting upset and angry, just frequently all the time. And I was like, okay, I clearly have some things here that I need to work through and process. And so because of that, I sought out some additional help from a professional to, be able to work through what had happened. And, the fact that, I kept my team and myself safe and I was able to come home to my husband, was definitely very much a saving grace for me and something that I clung to. But, when you have those types of things come up or, happen, it can be easy to just write it off like, oh, you're fine. You were fine. So it's fine when it wasn't fine. And to not let seeking out help be stigmatized and be something that was frowned upon. Like I couldn't handle it myself. And, I needed extra help. Therefore I wasn't enough, or I'm not enough, or I should be ashamed for some reason, that I needed to do that. And I think that also happens quite a lot. And people get afraid of seeking out, additional help because of that. Mental health in this country is something that's still very taboo and that we don't talk a lot about, but it is very, very important. And I think we see that play out over and over again in our country, and something that needs to be addressed, and something that I hope to be able to address with legislation through the Illinois Pharmacists Association in our state, of making sure that there are steep repercussions for healthcare provider violence, because it happens more than we think in this country. And believe it or not, we don't really talk about robberies in pharmacy, but I guarantee you there are so many pharmacists out there that have experienced it and that have gone through that, and maybe even more or worse than what I experienced. But there has to be people willing to stand up and say, enough is enough. We need to do something. This is not okay, and provide resources when needed.
Absolutely. Wow. So you use your voice as an advocate for pharmacists speaking out against violence against healthcare providers, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And really just the environment too, right? So, this person came up to the pharmacy and, they acted like they had a weapon. They kept grabbing for their pants and kept, threatening me. And obviously I couldn't tell for sure if they had one or not, but I wasn't, about to escalate the situation and figure that out. My priority was, just keeping my staff safe, keeping the patient that was at my counter safe, obviously keeping myself safe, and just making it through, that encounter. So yeah, it's so important, I think, that we share our stories and that we let people know, what happened and what's going on, and not being afraid to speak out about it. It's like the ugly thing, I think, in community pharmacy that we all know is a possibility, but we just hope doesn't happen to us. And then when it does happen, you're all of a sudden a part of this like club that you never wanted to be a part of. And so for me, the way that I dealt with that and was able to move forward was saying, what, this is not okay. And I don't ever want this to happen to anybody else or anyone to have to go through this. So what can we do to change that and at least put something into effect that might make someone think twice about that? Because believe it or not, I had guilt after the fact, of what had happened, because our company policy and most places are like this: you give them whatever they want, right? And so they obviously wanted narcotics. And I did what our company policy was. I went to the cabinet and I gave them what they wanted. And after the fact, as silly as it sounds, I felt guilty knowing that those narcotics were out there that could potentially harm somebody. Even though that person violated me and I was the victim in that situation, I couldn't help but think of, what if this person dies now, or somebody else comes in contact with those medications and dies because of, what had happened. And that was something I had to work through and realize that, that person made that decision to do that. And they, victimized me in that way, and that wasn't my fault and I wasn't responsible for that. That person was. But it was difficult. And I think those emotions that we go through as healthcare providers of wanting to help our patients, when that is then turned around on us and we're manipulated in that way, it's very difficult and can be very hard to just process that and be okay with that. And I certainly was not okay with it. And so I had to take that very negative event and figure out how I can spin it and do something positive as a result. Because unfortunately, the person who, robbed me was never caught. They're still out there. And, that's something that I have to live with every day and know that, the likelihood of them catching them is probably very little. But maybe that won't be the case for somebody else. And maybe we can put things into place and have better protections in our pharmacies to, protect our healthcare providers, our technicians, our pharmacists, all of our staff, regardless of the setting, to, make sure that they're safe and we can all, do our jobs to the best of our ability, but also feel safe in our workplace.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That is not an easy, both are not easy topics to talk about, being violated and then also addressing the mental health concerns that you need to address in order to continue to serve at the same pharmacy. That is not easy. And I got to ask, I don't know, there's no words to really follow up with what you just said, but what is the appropriate response for somebody like me who's listening to this? Because I want to just rush out and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But I mean, really, since you've been through a little bit of counseling, what would you like somebody like me to say to you?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and maybe this was just my reaction to it, but the one thing that has always stuck with me, after having gone through experience with this was, people saying to me, I'm sorry that happened to you, which is fine on its face value, and I get that. They are empathizing with, what the situation was, and that isn't particularly offensive. I think what was the most difficult for me was then hearing, because you're okay, everything is fine, and it wasn't. And so I think the best thing, there's never really, it's like when somebody dies too, right? There's just never the most appropriate words, and it's awkward for people and they really mean well. The same thing, translates when you go through the IVF process and people ask really inappropriate questions like, are you ever going to have kids, or, it's okay, you can just adopt, or, just things that people never should say, or did you have your child naturally, or, just people mean well, they really do. And I think you have to ground yourself and remind yourself of that. But at the same time, I think the best thing that you can do for someone that has gone through something like that, or is going through a difficult situation, is think about the questions that you want to ask and whether or not they're appropriate to ask, and just be there for them, and whether they're a colleague or someone that's really close to you. I think the most beneficial thing for me was just the hugs that I received. I will never forget this. The day after the robbery, I actually went back to the pharmacy. I didn't work that day. But my lead technician just gave me a huge hug. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. And that stuck with me for, forever. And it was exactly what I needed in that moment. And, she cried, I cried. And, it was just a hug was like the biggest thing that helped. And, there's just never going to be the right word specifically, but I think the knee-jerk reactions that you have, maybe hold those back for a minute and just think about what that person might need in that moment. Did they just go through something really difficult? And not everybody likes to be touched or hugged. So by all means, make sure you have consent first. But that I think is probably the most helpful versus the like, oh, I'm so glad nothing, bad happened, or, you're okay, like you're physically okay. So, the whole situation is fine. Those are things that we say, I think, to rationalize it in our own brain, because we think of all the horrible things that could have happened and, put ourselves in that situation. And so we want to make that right for ourselves and take away those negative feelings versus like being in the moment with the person. So maybe that's the answer, being in that moment with them and letting them think or feel how they need to, regardless of how it makes you feel.
Thank you for sharing that. That is a very traumatic event, and I am glad that you're okay. Brittany, I want to ask you about this book that you're writing so we can wrap up this episode on a positive note.
Yeah, well, thank you. Oh gosh, I feel like this book has been just a labor of love, which is ironic because it's about just IVF and the journey and reducing the stigma that's associated with the way that people have to create their families. I have been an open book over, I'd say, since October 2019, when I started the IVF process and journey, and learned that, my husband and I had been trying for 3 years at that point to create our family, and just, had no luck at that point. And turned out I had a polyp in my uterus, and I thought that was going to be the answer. But in the interim, my doctor also did an infertility workup, and it came back that, my levels just were so bad that the likelihood of us being able to get pregnant on our own was virtually non-existent. I still remember the conversation with my reproductive endocrinologist. That's what the infertility doctors are called. And we abbreviate it because, as we do in pharmacy with all things, we call them REs. A lot less, to spit out, I guess, on a regular basis. But of just having a real conversation about what diminished ovarian reserve was and how my egg quality was terrible and I had very few left, and the likelihood of us, getting pregnant on our own was like practically zero. So I decided very early on that, I didn't want to suffer in silence. And I think a lot of birthing people do. And they, for whatever reason, have shame associated with the way that they have to go about creating their families. And me too, coming from, a Christian background, I had a little bit of concern about how that might be accepted or what people, might think in the beginning. But then I was like, you know what? It's 2019, and we know so much more about the reproductive processes and why infertility happens. And like, this is not the era of like the guillotine and people, women's heads being chopped off because your body just, for whatever medical reason, doesn't do what it's supposed to, right? My husband isn't going to go and necessarily divorce me because of this. Not to say that doesn't happen. There are still a variety of issues and things that people work through, but I'm making light of the situation. But my point is to say that I knew that it was something that I was going to be open about and that I needed to do because I needed that support in going through the process. And the book, I feel like, has been something that I have been working on my entire life, because I just knew from a very early on age, and I don't know why I knew, but I did, that this was going to be my story. It was the journey, that I was going to go on. And because of that, I think it's really important to help people realize that there are real medical reasons that impact fertility, and that women are put in, and not even just women, but birthing individuals are put in very difficult positions of being made to feel, less than, for not being able to create their families or have their families. And there's so many layers to it on top of everything else too, the lack of coverage. And I could go on and on about, the costs associated with it. The first cycle that we did cost us around, $15,000. And I realized that I am very privileged to be able to afford that, where many women are not. And that's one of the biggest issues. And one of the horrifying things that I learned along this journey was all the black market sharing of medications, and people sharing open medications because they can't afford to buy the medicines. And so along with this non-stigma approach that I'm taking, I have lots of other, long-term things that I want to do in this women's health arena to make that not be the case anymore. There's no reason, that women and birthing people should not be able to afford their medications or have to share used open vials of medication to be able to create their families. I mean, as a pharmacist, it just makes me cringe. Or women and birthing people not knowing how to administer their medications appropriately, or using expired medications because they can't afford it. And just like I said, so many different layers to this. But the book is hopefully something that's going to just help any couple, because 1 in 8 experience infertility in the United States, feel comfortable and have a better understanding of what the IVF journey is, and to feel like they're not alone, and that they can navigate this process regardless of what the outcome is, because there's no guarantee. And it really is a roller coaster of emotions throughout the whole process. But that there are people out there that support them and understand what it is that they're going through, and to just give them a little bit of light in something that can be, so dark.
Wow, that is a heck of a topic. You are sharing something very private, and I want to wish you good luck with it. And I'd like to ask, when do you think you'll have it done? Because I know how it ends.
Yeah, ironically, I had to have my son in order to be able to finish writing the book. I had to take a break, and I just hit a spot with the book where I was like, oh, there's something that I just haven't experienced or gone through that is blocking me from finishing this book, from getting it done. And after having my son, it hit me. And so now I've been furiously writing whenever I have some downtime and he's taking a nap. So I'm really, plan is to have this done for 2022 and to share it then, hopefully, with the world. And what started out as one book idea has morphed into like 3. And so I'm hoping to,
how exciting.
Yes, I'm hoping to just hit 3 of the main key areas. So the medications, the stigma of IVF, and then also just the journey of, sharing stories of birthing individuals, and making sure, that it's diverse, and, all couples are represented in this. Because I think oftentimes we focus on women and infertility, but there's also male factor infertility. There's secondary infertility for, reasons that, maybe it's a medical condition like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or same-sex couples, that want to, start a family, and, for obvious biological reasons, you need sperm and you need egg to be able to, create an embryo. And so that is really important to me. And I want to highlight all of those, stories. And every journey is individual. You can't compare yourself. One person's journey is going to be very different from the next, but there are some key, highlights that I think are helpful along the way for everyone.
Well, I will be cheering you on for all 4. Is that 4 books altogether?
Well, 3, and maybe a children's book. We'll see. Because, once, and this is, I guess, the continuation of that, that openness. I have no plans or intentions on hiding it from my son. He will absolutely know how he's created, how he was created, and the process that his parents had to undergo to do that. And I think that's just as important, and not glossing over it, right? Like it just wasn't the time. Your parents had to wait for the right time, and what all the things that people say, but having a real discussion about the whys, and that there's many different whys out there for why someone needs some extra help in order to conceive a child is important.
Families are made in many different ways. I truly believe that. Well, good luck with all of your writing. And before we wrap this up, I know we've talked about a lot of stuff here. We've talked about Banner Medical. We've talked about your online courses. We've talked about entrepreneurship, imposter syndrome, all of this stuff. 2 questions. How can anybody listening to this get in touch with you? And if anybody wants to work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I love interacting with pharmacists out there, students, anyone who's interested. So I'd say the easiest way to get in touch with me is to find me on LinkedIn and, send me a note. Let's have a conversation. And then if you're interested in working for Banner, the best thing to do is to go to our website, which is bannermedicalwriting.com. And we can share that link with you, but I have a section on there called careers, and you can click on that, fill out the application. And depending on our needs, we reach out to writers all the time, and we're always looking for great talent. So I look forward to entertaining anyone that's interested.
Very good. And if anyone wants to hire you, is it the same website?
Yeah, it is. They can go to the same website if they're interested in working with us. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Believe it or not, a lot of job opportunities come that way as well from having a conversation. And, that LinkedIn or the website, or you can email me, is all of those are great options.
Very good. I'll put those links in the show notes. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Well, I just want to say thank you for being such a great, role model for women pharmacists out there, carrying on that non-traditional career path, and just, helping to show people that there's so much that we can do as pharmacists. And sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity to figure out what that job is, but you're creating a voice for, pharmacists across this country, not just women, all pharmacists. And I think that should be equally celebrated as well. And thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Take care of that little baby.
Thank you.
As you can tell, I could have talked to Brittany all day. There's a lot I learned from her. It was awesome. Here are just 2 final thoughts. 1, I'm going to take her medical writing Jumpstart course when it comes out in 2022. And 2, even though I only have my BS Pharm, a lot of the skills I do have would translate well to medical writing. And if anyone needs audio production in addition to medical writing, I'm all set up for that. I am an experienced audio producer. Plus, I have negotiation skills from being in the voiceover industry. As you heard, I have to fight for my rates. One of these days, I just might add medical writer to the list of ways I use my voice. Thank you for listening to episode 127 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. Links to Dr. Brittany Hoffmann-Eubanks' LinkedIn profile, Banner Medical's website, the new Medical Writing Jumpstart course, and more are in those show notes. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast in your favorite podcast player to get each new episode delivered to your smartphone every time a new episode comes out. Thank you again for listening.